They thought she was just paperwork, a quiet officer who counted crates and tracked fuel. But when the firestorm hit and every man looked for orders, it wasn't the general they turned to. It was her. You're watching Velvo Stories, where hidden legends come alive. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? The supply depot at Forward Operating Base Redstone was never silent. Pallets of ammunition clattered onto forklifts, crates of rations were stacked in neat towers. Fuel drums rolled across the yard under the morning sun. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. And in the center of it all stood Captain Elena Ramirez, clipboard in hand, eyes moving like clockwork. Most soldiers barely noticed her. To them, she was just logistics. She didn't carry a rifle slung across her chest. She didn't shout orders during drills. She didn't march at the head of a formation. She wore the same olive drab as everyone else, but with sleeves rolled, boots scuffed, hair pulled into a practical knot. Nothing about her screamed hero. She was the one who kept track of beans, bullets, and bandages. Nothing more. At least, that's what they believed. General Hart certainly believed it. A career officer with a chest full of medals and a voice that carried like thunder. He often dismissed Elena's briefings with a wave of his hand. "Just get me the numbers, Captain. I'll handle the fight." She would nod, quietly, and return to her depot. And yet when Hart's operations went smoothly, when convoys arrived on time, and units never ran dry, no one thought of the woman behind the ledger. Invisible competence was her world. But not forever. It began with the storm, not the kind made of wind and rain, but fire and lead. The regiment had been deployed forward, near the edge of a contested valley. The terrain was a nightmare. Narrow passes, high ridges perfect for ambush, a single supply route cutting through like a vein. Everyone knew that if the enemy struck the supply line, the whole operation would collapse. Elena knew it most of all. She had spent weeks memorizing every contour of the map, every choke point, every fallback route. It wasn't just logistics to her. It was survival. When the first explosion ripped through the valley, she was already moving. The convoy had been ambushed at the pass, trucks laden with ammunition and food burned, black smoke clawing into the sky. Soldiers scrambled for cover as machine gun fire raked the canyon walls. Radios screamed for orders, for backup, for someone to take command. General Hart's Humvee was in the column, but when the ambush hit, Hart froze. He shouted for men to return fire, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. His orders contradicted themselves: retreat, advance, hold position, until no one knew what to follow. That was when eyes began to shift. Not to the general, but to the woman standing in the dirt beside a burning truck, her clipboard gone, her sleeves rolled, her voice cutting through the firestorm with calm clarity. "Elkins, get that 50 cal up on the ridge. Mason, drag those crates into cover now. Bravo squad, left flank, suppressing fire. Go, go, go." Her words weren't shouted guesses. They were surgical strikes of command. Soldiers, desperate for direction, obeyed without hesitation. And to their astonishment, it worked. The chaos bent, shifted, began to flow into order. Kane, crouched behind a sandbag wall, caught a glimpse of her. She wasn't just barking orders, she was orchestrating. Every movement she commanded pulled from a mental map of supply, terrain, and manpower that no one else possessed. She knew which truck carried extra ammo, which squad had the stamina to flank, which position offered the best line of fire. In the middle of a nightmare, she saw the board as if it were a game she had already mastered. "Who the hell put the supply captain in charge?" a soldier shouted, half in disbelief, half in awe. No one answered, because by then it didn't matter. Orders were being followed, the line was holding, and all of it, every scrap of regained control, came from her. By the time the first wave of the ambush was broken, soldiers were breathing again, rifles steady, formation restored. Elena Ramirez stood at the center of it all, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. The general stood beside her, his face pale, words lost. For the first time in his career, command had slipped from his grasp, and it had landed squarely in the hands of the woman he had dismissed as just logistics. Under the blazing desert sun, smoke still clung to the valley floor as the convoy fought to regroup. The first wave of the ambush had been broken, but no one was under the illusion that it was over. From the ridgelines came the faint clatter of movement, the echo of shouted commands in a foreign tongue. More enemies were circling. Elena Ramirez didn't waste a second. She moved among the soldiers, her boots grinding over broken crates and shell casings, her voice steady and sharp. "Get those ammo boxes stacked by the sandbags. You, yes you, bring that wounded man behind the engine block. Medics, set up triage right here. I want every rifle pointed upslope before they come back." Men who only hours before had thought of her as the quiet officer with clipboards and supply charts now obeyed instantly. There was something about the way she spoke, the way her orders cut through the chaos without hesitation. She didn't shout to be heard over the noise. Her tone was too controlled for that. But every word carried authority, the kind that comes from certainty.
General Hart was still there, pale and sweating by the side of a ruined Humvee, his command radio pressed uselessly against his chest. He tried to bark out orders, but they came jumbled, clashing with Elena's clarity. Soldiers turned their heads once, confused, and then ignored him. They knew who was in charge now, even if no one dared say it out loud. From the ridge came another burst of gunfire. Bullets ripped into the ground, sending men diving for cover. Elena dropped flat behind a tire rim, dirt spraying over her. She kept her head low, scanning the terrain. In her mind, the map unfolded again. Ammunition counts, lines of fire, routes of retreat. It was second nature, the same skills she had been dismissed for, now saving their lives. She raised her voice. "Bravo squad, shift right, cut them off. Delta, suppress that ridgeline with everything you've got. Kane, take 3 men, get up the drainage ditch and flank their position before they regroup." Kane, who had fought in real wars under real leaders, hesitated only a heartbeat, then nodded, grabbed 2 men and charged toward the ditch. He didn't question why he was taking orders from her. He just knew she was right. Explosions shook the valley as grenades went off along the slope. Screams and gunfire blended into the choking smoke. Yet in the maelstrom, a strange rhythm emerged. Her commands gave the regiment shape, and the men moved as though guided by instinct they hadn't known they had. For the first time since the ambush began, the convoy was not prey, it was fighting back. Mason, crouched beside a burning truck, couldn't stop staring. He had always known Elena as the quiet captain who checked manifests and signed requisition slips. Now, she was something else entirely. He muttered, half to himself, "She's not leading like she wants to. She's leading like she's done this before." And that was the truth of it. Her eyes weren't just sharp, they were haunted. Each command seemed pulled from experience, scars invisible but real. Logistics wasn't her only history. Somewhere buried under classified files and erased missions, Elena Ramirez had worn a different mantle, and now, piece by piece, it was showing. The second wave came harder, faster, with heavier weapons. Mortars began to fall, blasting craters into the valley floor. Trucks exploded, fireballs climbing into the sky. Men shouted, some panicked, some frozen. The general's voice was lost entirely in the chaos. But then Elena's voice cut through, steady and unshaken. "Hold your line. Fall back only when I tell you. Get those mortars spotted. Use the ridge. Second peak. Adjust fire left." Someone answered her with the kind of reflex born of trust. Then another. Soon the regiment wasn't listening for the general's radio crackle at all. They were watching her hands, waiting for her gestures, reacting to her shouts.
For a moment, as the dust cleared and the firestorm raged, Elena stood in the open, her uniform torn, her face streaked with sweat and soot. Bullets snapped past, but she didn't flinch. She raised her arm, signaling squads into position with a precision that felt almost choreographed. To the man watching, she looked like the eye of the storm, calm, immovable, unbreakable. And that was when the realization spread, unspoken but undeniable. She wasn't just logistics. She never had been. By the time the ridge was finally silenced under the regiment's counterattack, bodies strewn, guns abandoned, the men weren't looking to the general anymore. Their gazes sought Elena, waiting for her next word, their respect written in every glance. General Hart saw it too. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight, fury simmering beneath the surface. She had taken from him something more precious than rank or command radio frequencies. She had taken their belief, and belief was something he could never get back. The valley was quiet for only a heartbeat, the kind of silence that made soldiers hold their breath because they knew it never lasted. Smoke drifted upward from burning trucks. The metallic taste of gunpowder clung to the air, and the men who still clutched their rifles felt the tremor of adrenaline in their arms. For an instant, they believed the fight was over. Elena Ramirez knew better. She crouched low behind the crate of munitions, her eyes scanning the ridgelines. The enemy had fallen back, but not broken. They were probing, testing, drawing the regiment into a false calm. She'd seen this pattern before, in another desert, in another war she wasn't supposed to have fought. The memories pressed at the edges of her mind, unwelcome but vivid. She forced her voice steady. "Check your magazines. Reload now. This isn't finished." The soldiers obeyed instantly. There was no hesitation anymore, no sideways glance at the general for confirmation. They had already chosen. Their survival depended on the woman who had turned panic into order. General Hart stood a few meters away, his uniform smudged with soot, his face drawn tight with anger. He raised his radio again, fumbling with words, but no one answered. The channel was alive with reports, fire teams calling to Elena, not to him. Each time her calm reply came through, it was another nail in the coffin of his authority. Then the second storm hit. The ridgeline erupted in coordinated fire, mortars arced overhead, smashing into the convoy with terrifying precision. Dirt and shrapnel tore through the air, men ducking and screaming. Through the haze, enemy figures poured from the rocks, more than before, better armed, moving with ruthless intent. For a split second, even the hardiest veterans faltered. The general froze again, shouting nonsense orders, drowned in the cacophony. But Elena was already moving.
"Alpha Squad, cover the center. Don't let them split us. Bravo, lay down suppressing fire. Delta, pull the wounded behind the wrecks. Keep them breathing. Kane, take Mason and flank their mortar team now." The words weren't desperate. They were precise, as if she'd rehearsed this fight 100 times in her head. And the soldiers, battered and bleeding, found themselves obeying her before doubt could even form. Kane gave her a sharp nod, then sprinted with Mason up the drainage ditch, vanishing in smoke and dust. The others shifted into formation, their firepower focused, their panic melting into purpose. Elena rose from cover, dirt streaked across her cheek, her uniform ripped at the sleeve. She fired short, controlled bursts into the advancing wave, each shot deliberate. Around her, the regiment surged back to life, their rifles cracking in unison. The enemy hit them like a hammer. Men stumbled under the weight of the onslaught. Trucks shuddered as bullets shredded their steel. Yet each time the line wavered, Elena's voice pulled it back. She moved through the chaos like a conductor of war, gestures sharp, words cutting through the noise. "Shift right, watch your spacing, hold the ridge, don't give them the canyon." One soldier, trembling behind his rifle, whispered to another, "How does she know all this? She's not supposed to." His words trailed off as a mortar shell landed short, rocking the ground beneath them. When the smoke cleared, Elena was still standing, shouting the next move, unshaken. To them, she seemed intouchable. And yet inside, Elena felt the weight of every order. She knew exactly what she was doing because she had done it before, in a place still classified, under a code name erased from records. The ghost captain. She had thought that part of her life buried, but in this firestorm, it had returned with brutal clarity. Another explosion rocked the valley. A truck went up in flames, showering sparks. Men ducked, some ready to run. Elena's voice lashed them back into place. "Hold the line. We don't fall back unless I give the word." They believed her, not because of her rank, not because of orders stamped by some distant office, but because she had earned it, here and now, in blood and smoke. By the time Kane returned, dragging the shattered remains of the enemy's mortar tube behind him, the regiment was no longer fighting in desperation. They were pressing forward. Shots rang out from the ridge, enemies tumbling back, their momentum broken. When the firing finally ebbed, when the last echoes died in the canyon, the men lowered their rifles in disbelief. They were still standing. Against numbers that should have crushed them, they had held. And at the center of it all was Elena, her chest heaving, her face streaked with sweat and ash. She didn't look like the quiet officer from the depot anymore. She looked like the one thing every soldier recognized when they saw it: a leader.
The soldiers exchanged glances, their respect silent but undeniable. One by one, their eyes found her, not the general, her. General Hart saw it too, his jaw clenched, fists curling as he watched authority slip from his grasp. And in that moment, rage twisted inside him like a blade. If he couldn't break her in battle, he would find another way. But the men didn't see his anger. All they saw was her silhouette through the smoke, rifle slung, eyes sharp. And in their hearts, they already knew. She wasn't just logistics. She was the one they would follow through fire. The camp at Redstone was restless that night. The convoy had limped back under the cover of dusk, trucks battered, soldiers silent, the smell of smoke clinging to their gear. In the mess tent, no one laughed. No one boasted of shots taken or enemies driven back. Instead, they spoke in hushed tones, eyes flicking toward the woman who sat quietly at a corner table, sipping from a dented canteen. Captain Elena Ramirez. She had not claimed victory. She had not raised her fist or demanded recognition. She had simply led them through fire, then sat down among them like she had always belonged there. But the soldier's eyes told the story Hart wished no one had seen. The regiment no longer looked to him. They looked to her. General Hart sat in his quarters, hands trembling as he unbuckled his holster. He stared at his reflection in a scratched metal mirror. The sling on his arm from the first clash had healed poorly, the scar a constant reminder of weakness. His jaw tightened. They can't take her seriously. She's supply, nothing more. He said it aloud, as though words could make it true. But deep inside, he knew the truth. She had exposed him, not with defiance, but with competence. And men respected competence more than medals. He couldn't allow it. He summoned 3 of his closest officers, men who owed their promotions to his signature, not their courage. They stood stiffly, nervous under his glare.
Tomorrow, Hart said, voice low and dangerous, we conduct a full-scale exercise, ambush scenario. She will lead a supply column, and I'll place her where she cannot hide. One of the officers shifted uneasily. Sir, after today the men will follow her. If it looks like you're setting her up, Hart slammed his fist against the desk. They'll see what she really is when she fails. Logistics can't win battles. She'll crumble under pressure without my guidance, and when she does, they'll come crawling back. The officers exchanged glances, but none dared argue. Orders were orders. The next day, under a sky washed pale by desert heat, the regiment assembled. Trucks were loaded with crates, weapons checked, soldiers lined in formation. The men were weary, their uniforms stained from the previous day. But there was something new in their posture, a quiet steadiness.
Elena stood by the lead vehicle, clipboard tucked under her arm, though she barely glanced at it. She had memorized every route, every waypoint. Her eyes lingered on the canyon walls, the ridges where she knew the general would spring his exercise. She felt Kane approach before she heard him. He walked up, his gear slung loose, sweat already streaking his brow. He leaned in, voice low. You know this isn't a drill, right? He's trying to bury you out there. Elena didn't answer at once. She scanned the horizon, lips pressed thin. Finally, she said, Then I'll do what I always do. Keep them alive. Kane studied her, then gave a grim smile. That's why they'll follow you. The convoy rolled out. Dust rose in thick clouds, engines rumbling as trucks crawled through the pass. The air was tense, soldiers gripping rifles tighter than usual. The first blast came mid-route. A truck in the center erupted in flames, sending men diving for cover. Shouts filled the canyon. Hart's voice crackled uselessly over the radio, shouting contradictory orders. Some soldiers hesitated, waiting for him to correct himself, but most turned instinctively to Elena. Her voice came calm and sharp through the comms. Front 2 trucks, push through. Rear vehicles, swing wide and set up a perimeter. Medics, move now, pull the wounded clear. The regiment snapped into motion. Within seconds, they weren't scattered prey, they were coordinated defenders. Elena leapt from her truck, boots skidding on loose gravel, and took position behind a rock outcropping. Her rifle barked, covering men as they dragged supplies into safety. On the ridges, silhouettes appeared, firing down, but this time the men weren't panicked. They had someone to anchor them. Kane slid in beside her, returning fire. He shouted over the roar, "He thought this would break you. Looks like it's breaking them instead." And Kane was right. Each shot, each order, each precise movement revealed the truth Hart had tried to hide. Elena wasn't guessing. She wasn't pretending. She was commanding. The soldiers followed because she gave them what Hart never could: clarity in chaos. Far back in the column, Hart gritted his teeth as he watched through binoculars. He saw the men moving in sync under her direction, saw the ridge suppressed and the convoy reforming. His chest burned with fury. He had wanted her humiliated, cast down in front of them. Instead, she was rising higher than ever before. She's not supposed to lead. She's not supposed to be. His words caught, choked by the sight of the regiment ignoring him. The truth was undeniable. They had already chosen. Elena Ramirez, once dismissed as just logistics, now stood at the center of fire and smoke, unshaken, unstoppable. And as the canyon echoed with the sound of gunfire and shouted orders, the men no longer called her captain. They called her something else, quietly, under their breath, a name born in the firestorm. The Ghost Captain. The desert winds had carried the sound of battle long into the night, but by dawn, forward operating base Redstone was eerily calm. Soldiers moved with a new rhythm, sharper, steadier, as though the firestorm had burned away hesitation. Yet, beneath the surface, tension hummed. Everyone knew what was coming next. General Hart had lost the regiment, not on paper, not in official records, but in something far more important, in the minds of his men. They obeyed his orders still, but only because the uniform demanded it. Their respect, their trust, their loyalty, all of that now belonged to Captain Elena Ramirez. He couldn't allow it. He stood in the command tent with his inner circle of officers, their faces drawn tight in the dim light of lanterns. Papers lay scattered across the table. After-action reports, ammunition counts, casualty tallies. Hart jabbed a finger at them. You see what she's doing? She's hijacking this regiment. Every man out there whispers her name like she's some kind of savior. If I don't put an end to this now, she'll undo everything I've built. One officer hesitated. Sir, with respect, she did hold the line. Twice. Men see that. Hart's glare froze him. They see what I allow them to see. Tomorrow I'll put her in front of the general staff. Let's see how her so-called heroics look under scrutiny. She's going to answer for every decision she made. Word spread quickly through the camp. There would be a tribunal. Soldiers whispered about it in the chow line, in the barracks, at the perimeter posts. Some cursed under their breath. Others exchanged grim looks. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew this wasn't about justice. It was about Hart crushing the woman who had shown him up. Kane stormed into Elena's quarters, slamming the door behind him. She sat at a small desk, quietly rolling up maps, her uniform still streaked with soot from the fight. They're setting you up, Kane growled. Hart's going to drag you in front of the brass, spin this so you look reckless. He'll call it insubordination, make it sound like you disobeyed him. Elena didn't look up. She kept folding the maps with steady hands. I did disobey him. Kane froze. Then why are you so damn calm? Finally, she lifted her eyes. They were tired, shadowed, but unyielding. Because every man who stood in that valley yesterday knows the truth. Paper doesn't win battles. Belief does. And he's already lost it. The tribunal was held in a makeshift hall, canvas walls stretched over wooden beams. The general staff sat at a long table, metals glinting under weak light. Soldiers filled the benches, crammed shoulder to shoulder, their eyes tense with expectation. General Hart strode to the front, his voice carrying. Gentlemen, we are here to address a dangerous precedent. A logistics officer, Captain Ramirez, took it upon herself to override my authority in combat. She led without orders, endangered the regiment, and undermined the chain of command. Murmurs rippled through the soldiers in the crowd. Hart ignored them, slamming a report onto the table. Her actions may look like success, but insubordination cannot be tolerated. Today, it's supply officers giving commands. Tomorrow, it's privates. Discipline collapses. Armies collapse. I demand she be relieved of duty. The officers at the table nodded grimly, scribbling notes. It seemed the narrative was working. Then a voice rose from the benches. Permission to speak, sir. It was Kane. He stood tall, his uniform dirty, his boots scuffed. His voice carried the weight of every man who had been there. With respect, General, if Captain Ramirez hadn't taken command, none of us would be alive to sit in this room. The tribunal tried to silence him, but others stood. Mason, Elkins, dozens more. One after another, their voices cut through the hall. She gave us orders when no one else did.
She knew where to put us, where to hit. She kept us breathing." The room shook with their words, and then silence fell as all eyes turned to Elena. She hadn't spoken yet. She rose slowly, adjusting her uniform. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable carried. "I didn't take command to challenge rank. I did it because men were dying, and silence kills faster than bullets. If that is insubordination, then I'll accept whatever judgment you pass. But if you strip me of duty, you tell these soldiers that survival was wrong, that competence is dangerous, and if that's the lesson, then this regiment is already broken." The hall was dead silent. General Hart's face burned red, sweat on his brow. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the presiding general raised his hand. His expression was unreadable, his gaze shifting from Hart to Elena, and then to the soldiers who had spoken. "I have heard enough." The room held its breath. "Captain Ramirez will not be relieved. On the contrary, she will be commended. Effective immediately, she is to serve as acting operations officer for this regiment. Her record will reflect her leadership under fire." The words landed like thunder. The soldiers erupted, not in cheers, but in something deeper, the sound of boots slamming the ground in unison, a thunderous rhythm of respect. Hart staggered, as if the ground had been ripped from under him. Everything he had feared was now real. He had tried to bury her. Instead, he had raised her higher. Elena stood motionless, her face unreadable, though her chest tightened with something between relief and dread. The ghost captain had not been erased. She was alive, and now she had been unmasked. The tribunal's verdict hung in the air long after the soldiers' boots stopped pounding the ground. The canvas walls of the hall trembled with the echo, and the officers at the long table exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, the chain of command had bent in plain view of the regiment, and it had bent toward Elena.
General Hart remained standing at the front, his face pale beneath the weight of humiliation. The medals across his chest glinted mockingly, no longer badges of respect but reminders of authority slipping through his grasp. He tried to speak, to salvage something from the wreckage, but his voice cracked. "This is insubordination. This undermines everything." No one listened. Elena did not look at him. She kept her gaze forward, her stance steady. Inside, her heart hammered. She had not sought this. She had only wanted to keep the regiment alive. But survival has a price, and hers had been the truth coming to light. She was not just logistics. Not anymore. When the soldiers filed out of the hall, their eyes carried no doubt. Kane approached her first, his expression a rare mix of pride and relief. "They can call you whatever rank they want, but out there, you're already the one they follow." Others followed behind him, Mason, Elkins, dozens of men and women who had bled under her command. One by one, they gave her the smallest gestures, nods, clenched fists over their hearts, quiet salutes when no officer was watching. Each unspoken message was the same: "We are yours to lead." General Hart stormed past, his face dark with rage, but no one moved aside for him. For the first time, the regiment didn't part in respect as he passed. They barely acknowledged him at all. That night, the desert air was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky. Elena stood alone at the edge of camp, her hands resting on the railing of a watchtower. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of generators. She had been given the title of Acting Operations Officer, but the weight of it pressed against her shoulders. With it came responsibility she had tried to bury years ago,
The ghost captain, the role she'd thought she'd left behind in classified reports and forgotten missions. Now it was alive again, carved into the memory of every soldier who had seen her in the firestorm. Kane climbed the ladder and joined her, carrying 2 tin cups of bitter coffee. He handed her one, then leaned against the rail. "You know what they're calling you now, don't you?" Elena raised an eyebrow, but he answered anyway. "The ghost captain. It's spreading through camp like wildfire." She exhaled, a humorless smile tugging at her lips. "I never wanted a name like that again." Kane studied her in the starlight. "It doesn't matter what you want. The men need it. They need someone who doesn't crack when it counts, someone who gives them hope when everything's burning. That's who you are to them." She didn't reply. She just sipped the coffee, staring out at the vast darkness of the valley where so many had nearly died. Her silence was not denial, but acceptance. At dawn, the regiment assembled for inspection. Rows of soldiers stood in perfect formation, boots polished, uniforms dusty but sharp. At the head of the line, General Hart appeared, his voice rising in hollow commands. But no matter how he barked, no matter how he tried to seize control, the eyes of the regiment slid past him. They landed on her. Captain Elena Ramirez, the quiet officer who had once signed supply forms and counted crates. The woman dismissed as irrelevant, invisible. Now she stood at the edge of the parade ground, her posture calm, her face streaked with faint scars of smoke and grit. She did not call attention to herself, yet attention came all the same. When the general finally turned to address them, his words faltered. The soldiers weren't listening. It was subtle at first, a few boots shifting, a few heads tilting. Then, as though on an unspoken signal, dozens of soldiers snapped to attention, their eyes locked forward, not on Hart, but on Elena. The sound of discipline, once his alone to command, now belonged to her. The colonel overseeing the inspection caught it too. His gaze lingered, then his voice cut through the silence. "Captain Ramirez, step forward." Elena hesitated, but only for a moment. She walked across the parade ground, the soldiers' eyes following her every step. The colonel studied her, then turned deliberately away from Hart. "You kept this regiment alive when it should have fallen. Whatever name they give you, whatever rank you hold, it's clear who they trust." The words rang across the field like a verdict. Hart's shoulders sagged, his authority shattered before his entire command. The men didn't cheer, didn't shout. They simply stood taller, their faith carved into their silence. Elena looked at them, at the faces she had saved, and for the first time allowed herself to accept what she had resisted all along. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just logistics. She was their commander in everything but name. She was the ghost captain.